We held a premiere 2 nights ago, as you are aware. Richard Gere eventually gave up jogging at the age of 75. The world stopped, as the man who had personified Hollywood charm for decades said 10 words. It has nothing to do with his red carpets or blockbusters. Rather, he disclosed a reality that required 3 marriages and 50 years to comprehend. He acknowledged that, up until this point, he wasn't always a man someone could remain with. Why did it take a lifetime to locate the lady who changed everything? Come along as we reveal the true tale of Richard Gere's quest for wholeness. Roots in Pennsylvania. Richard Gere was a quiet, introspective child growing up in Syracuse, New York, and then Pennsylvania, long before he became a movie star. He didn't conform to the stereotype of a potential Hollywood star. He found solace in music and introspection rather than pursuing fame. He composed music for his school plays, in addition to playing the trumpet. The trumpet was more than simply an instrument to young Richard. It served as a means of creating a secret realm in which he could communicate emotions he was unable to articulate. He felt at ease because of his musical upbringing, which distinguished him from other children his age who were more concerned with conventional objectives. Able to wear a mask. You might put on a mask by playing differently. He could portray a variety of roles, such as a lover, a rebel, or a hero. For a young man who was extremely self-conscious about his identity, this was the ideal remedy. No one could see the true Richard, who felt insecure and out of place if he were performing. His ability to act served as a shield, but it also meant that even as he rose to fame, he was just serving to keep the outside world at bay. This tranquil life was further complicated by his time studying philosophy at the University of Massachusetts. He was more interested in the why of life than the how. During his early years, he read about many perspectives on the world. Long after he graduated from school, these profound concepts about life and the mind continued to influence him. Richard was already considering how to discover a greater meaning in life, whereas the majority of young performers were preoccupied with landing their next big job. The foundation for his future was laid by his early philosophical studies. He ultimately felt so at ease, leaving the pinnacle of his profession in search of quiet, because they showed him that Hollywood's fame and cacophony weren't the most essential things. However, the number of women who attempted to hide behind his mask increased, along with his notoriety, restlessness, and rising stars. Richard Gere's personal life changed as quickly as his career took off in the 1970s. He was a young man at the time with a strong desire to be successful in Hollywood. His sexual relationships frequently felt more like brief chapters in a novel than long-term narratives, since he was so preoccupied with his career and his enigmatic public persona. Carol Mallory, a model, was one of these early companions and characterized him as someone who was always evolving. Penelope Milford, his co-star in the film Days of Heaven, was another. Richard found it difficult to stay still, even if these ladies were significant to him at the time. Building a long-term residence with someone else was not as important to him as his professional development. Because he was still figuring out who he was, he didn't quite know how to be the type of partner who remains. When he traveled to Nepal and India in 1978 with a woman named Sylvia Martins, everything changed. Richard was introduced to an entirely new way of life by Sylvia, a painter. This journey was a significant turning point. Richard met Tibetan monks and started learning about Buddhism while traversing the Himalayan Alps. He sat in old temples and heard instructors explain that the material world, which included things like fame, fortune, and attractiveness, wasn't what was really important. His life was permanently divided as a result of this experience. On the one hand, he was a well-known actor who was sought after by everybody. He was a spiritual learner, on the other hand, who sought inner serenity by sitting in quiet. It was difficult to reconcile these two universes. Richard rose to prominence as one of the world's top stars throughout the 1980s. He even received the title of sexiest man alive, something most people would only dream of. For Richard, though, this celebrity seemed like a meaningless show. The way the public perceived him began to cause him great discomfort. People perceived him as a heartthrob or a golden boy. However, he was becoming increasingly restless on the inside. He discovered that his desire to retreat increased with his level of fame. In an effort to aid the Tibetan people, he started devoting more time to meditation and humanitarian projects. It dawned on him that being a movie star was simply another mask he was wearing, and it was beginning to feel heavy. He was still going too quickly to locate what he was searching for, something genuine. Then he met a woman who would stop everyone in their tracks at a beautiful summer party. The icon is misaligned. Two of the world's most famous individuals first met in 1988 during a beautiful outdoor gathering in Beverly Hills. Herb Ritz, a well-known photographer who was acquainted with both of them, through the celebration. At the age of 39, Richard Gere was already one of Hollywood's top cinematic stars. At just 22 years old, Cindy Crawford was rapidly rising to the top of the global supermodel rankings. Despite their 17-year age difference, they instantly and deeply connected. The cameras weren't invited to the meeting. Two individuals who were at the pinnacles of their respective fields naturally clicked. They appeared on magazine covers and at the greatest red carpet events, making them the most photographed couple in the world for a period. They began to feel the weight of being Hollywood's ideal pair as the years passed. They had extremely hectic schedules and were always surrounded by admirers and photographers. They abruptly decided to get married in 1991. They traveled to Las Vegas for a small private ceremony rather than a huge wedding with hundreds of guests. Even their wedding bands were made of fake gold. Rather, they utilized rings fashioned from gum wrapper silver foil. Although this was perceived as romantic by some, it was actually a very rash decision. They weren't only honoring their romance, they were searching frantically for a sense of security. They believed that by entering into a legal commitment, they would be able to bridge the growing gap between them as a result of their busy lifestyles. The issue was that their relationship, which appeared flawless in pictures, was finding it difficult to endure the harsh realities of everyday life. They were at quite different phases of life. Cindy was still quite young and was only starting to develop her mature identity. She was preoccupied with the thrill of her newfound popularity and her expanding profession, but Richard was already sick of being the center of attention. He was heading toward a life of introspection and meditation. While she was still getting ready to go across the globe for her next big job, he preferred to sit in quiet. They were both decent individuals who just had different goals in life. They made the decision to dissolve their marriage in 1995 after realizing that love was insufficient to reconcile their disparate objectives. Richard made the decision to move away from the spotlight and seek out a more subdued form of love following this highly publicized separation. Two distinct rates of life. Richard and Cindy were living in two very separate worlds while being married. When Cindy Crawford was in her early 20s, she was at the pinnacle of her modeling career. She was doing picture shoots, touring the world, and becoming well-known. She was still developing as a person because she was so young. She had a great desire to use her career and the wonderful chances that awaited her to define who she was. Being in the spotlight contributed to Cindy's development. She aspired to be successful, well-known, and involved in the fashion world. Richard Gere, on the other hand, was beginning to feel somewhat differently about celebrity and was already in his 40s. He had been a movie star for a long time, and the public's unceasing attention was beginning to wear him down. He wanted peace and quiet rather than greater notoriety. He studied Buddhism and meditated a lot. He desired to distance himself from the boisterous Hollywood way of life and concentrate on his personal spiritual development. Richard was busy sitting down and reflecting, while Cindy was busy advancing in the fast-paced fashion industry. Their everyday demands and objectives no longer aligned, which led to a significant dispute. Cindy subsequently described losing herself as a result of their disparate paces. Cindy frequently attempted to alter her own conduct in order to please Richard, who was older and quite certain of his spiritual path. She attempted to follow his example, adhere to his rules, and lead a peaceful life because she wanted to be the woman he needed. But as a result, she stopped paying attention to her own wants and needs. Instead of being herself, she was playing a part in their marriage. This is their relationship's tragedy. Despite the fact that their paths were heading in different ways, they both had feelings for one another. They both realized they could no longer walk together by 1995. The usual Hollywood drama did not accompany their divorce. There were no large-scale public altercations, nasty newspaper articles, or financial legal disputes. It ended in a very courteous and calm manner. They both were aware that they were out of sync. Cindy needed to be allowed to explore her identity as an independent woman, and Richard needed a companion who could participate in his profound quiet. For the simple reason that they had changed and had different standards for happiness, they made the decision to split up. Following his breakup with Cindy, Richard made the decision to step back from the limelight for a bit, in an attempt to find a new sort of companion who genuinely shared his passion for living a peaceful life. Richard Gere made a very particular decision following his 1995 divorce from Cindy Crawford. He made the decision to get away from the flashing lights and the paparazzi's unceasing scrutiny. He no longer desired to be the focal point of a Hollywood extravaganza. Rather, he delved further into his spiritual life, visiting locations like Tibet and Nepal to engage in silent meditation. He wanted a life that was more meaningful and intimate. He wanted to hang out with folks who didn't give a damn about celebrity or magazine covers. He met Gere Lowell during this period of trying to find serenity. Because she featured in a James Bond film, the majority of people recognized her as a Bond girl. Yet, her true life was considerably different from that glossy persona. Gere was a very composed and grounded individual. She wasn't attempting to become a worldwide celebrity or chase the fast-paced world of fashion. Like Richard, she relished the tranquil life. She provided Richard with a new sort of collaboration since she was so steady and at ease. They might be happy without attending large gatherings. Simply spending time together in a peaceful setting satisfied them. When Richard was 51 years old in 2000, something unexpected happened in his life. Homer was the name of his kid with Gere. For Richard, becoming a father later in life was a significant turning point. Prior to the birth of Homer, Richard devoted much of his time to contemplating his own spiritual development and inner serenity. He spent a lot of time thinking about his own thoughts and emotions, or internal introspection. However, he had to turn his attention to external care after having a son. This implies that he had to prioritize the needs of others before his own. If his son needed him, he couldn't simply sit in silence for hours. He had to develop a really practical method to be there for his family. Eventually, he and Gere relocated to Pound Ridge, a peaceful part of New York, where they lived on a farm, and concentrated on raising their kid away from the bustle of the city. For a long while, it appeared that Richard had at last discovered the ideal, peaceful life he had always desired. However, a new type of quiet was beginning to develop between them, even in the midst of all that tranquility. When absence turns into quiet. Richard Gere made a very particular decision following his 1995 divorce from Cindy Crawford. He made the decision to get away from the flashing lights and the paparazzi's unceasing scrutiny. He no longer desired to be the focal point of a Hollywood extravaganza. Rather, he delved further into his spiritual life, visiting locations like Tibet and Nepal to engage in silent meditation. He wanted a life that was more meaningful and intimate. He wanted to hang out with folks who didn't give a damn about celebrity or magazine covers. He met Gere Lowell during this period of trying to find serenity. She had starred in a James Bond film, so most people recognized her as a Bond girl. However, she was not at all like that glossy persona in real life. Gere was a very composed and grounded individual. She wasn't attempting to become a worldwide celebrity or chase the fast-paced world of fashion. Like Richard, she relished the tranquil life. She provided Richard with a new sort of collaboration since she was so steady and at ease. They might be happy without attending large gatherings. Simply spending time together in a peaceful setting satisfied them. When Richard was 51 years old in 2000, something unexpected happened in his life. Homer was the name of his kid with Gere. For Richard, becoming a father later in life was a significant turning point. Prior to the birth of Homer, Richard devoted much of his time to contemplating his own spiritual development and inner serenity. He spent a lot of time thinking about his own thoughts and emotions, or internal introspection. However, he had to turn his attention to external care after having a son. This implies that he had to prioritize the needs of others before his own. If his son needed him, he couldn't simply sit in silence for hours. He had to develop a really practical method to be there for his family. Eventually, he and Gere relocated to Pound Ridge, a peaceful part of New York, where they lived on a farm and concentrated on raising their kid away from the bustle of the city. For a long while, it appeared that Richard had at last discovered the ideal, peaceful life he had always desired. However, a new type of quiet was beginning to develop between them, even in the midst of all that tranquility. The bridge is Padma Lakshmi. Richard Gere met someone in 2014 who assisted him in bridging the gap between his past and present when his divorce from Gere Lowell was still going through the court system. This individual was Padma Lakshmi, the well-known writer and host of the TV program Top Chef. At a charity benefit event, they got together backstage. Both of them were hurt by public life at the time. This indicates that they had both experienced extremely trying breakups and divorces that were well publicized. As a result, they both experienced emotional tiredness. Both of them were sick of the drama and commotion that came with being famous. The fact that they didn't have to explain themselves to one another gave them comfort when they began conversing. Compared to Richard's previous high-energy relationships, their relationship was extremely different. There were no huge interviews where they discussed their love or spectacular red carpet appearances. Rather, they concentrated on their individual rehabilitation. Quiet dinners and lengthy, in-depth talks defined their time together. This connection functioned as a holding pattern for several months. This indicates that it was a secure area where they could both stop running and spend some time still. Together, they weren't attempting to create a lasting empire. All they were doing was helping each other feel a bit less alone and healing from their pasts. But as the months passed, they were aware that their paths continued to diverge. Padma was a dynamic lady who continued to be deeply engaged in both her business and public life. As we've seen, Richard was retreating farther and deeper into his meditative and quiet world. They didn't strive to make the relationship work because they had both learnt so much from their past marriages. They learned an important lesson. It is impossible to compel harmony. Love isn't always sufficient to keep two people together if they don't completely agree on how they want to conduct their everyday lives. There was absolutely no drama in their split, which was entirely mutual. Their lives were simply not a good fit, so they thought it would be best to stay friends. For Richard, this was a pivotal occasion since it was the first time he ended a relationship without feeling guilty or like a failure. He came to see that being alone isn't the only way to find tranquility. It's about finding someone whose rhythm is exactly the same as yours. His short time with Padma softened his heart and helped him get ready for the most significant encounter of his life, which was quickly approaching. However, he didn't have to wait long since his life was about to change forever due to a fortuitous encounter in Italy. Alejandra Silva's last residence. Richard Gere visited the stunning Italian hamlet of Positano in 2014. He was lodging at a hotel run by Alejandra Silva's family. Richard and Alejandra were both going through the challenging divorce process at the time. They were both bearing the emotional load and grief of broken relationships because they were plagued by their pasts. They were able to see each other quite clearly since they shared a similar emotional state. They saw neither a socialite nor a movie star. They observed two individuals seeking tranquility and a new beginning. Richard frequently pursued love while he was younger in Hollywood. He led a noisy existence, moved quickly, and was frequently motivated by his job and his enigmatic persona. However, he employed an entirely different approach with Alejandra. He practiced waiting rather than attempting to win her over with his celebrity or extravagant gestures. He was really kind and patient. He sent her handwritten notes and sent her flowers every day. He even composed little songs for her. He wasn't putting on a show to impress her or attempting to win her. Rather, he was only providing her with tranquility and a solid, dependable presence. He wanted her to understand that he was there to stay rather than to hurry her. Alejandra was first wary. Their ages were separated by 33 years. She was also concerned about the expense of leading such a prominent life. She quickly discovered, though, that Richard wasn't seeking a conventional Hollywood romance. He was searching for a karmic transition, which is a spiritual term for their souls going in the same direction. They both had a strong desire to discover inner peace and assist others. They were married in a private Buddhist ceremony in 2018. Alejandra also made the decision to become a Buddhist, so this was a crucial time. She did it because she felt a sincere connection to Richard's views, rather than because he urged her to. Richard had a companion for the first time who lived his spiritual life alongside him rather than simply putting up with it. Together, they created a life that was self-sufficient. They returned to the Pound Ridge farmhouse. However, there was no loneliness or stillness in the home this time. Rather, it was full of kids, music, and a feeling of familiarity. She never felt the need to go, so Richard finally discovered someone he didn't have to persuade to remain. They were no longer two individuals attempting to fulfill one another. Walking the same journey together were two individuals who were already entire. Richard is viewing his life in a different light now that he has at last discovered serenity. Wholeness is superior to passion. Richard Gere's life has changed significantly between the 1980s and 1990s. A movie star's house used to be packed with luxury objects, movie posters, and trophies that served as constant reminders of their celebrity. However, The morning ritual in Richard and Alejandra's Pound Ridge farmhouse is far more predictable and tranquil. Crayons, children's books, and the sound of his young boys playing fill the house. Richard still composes music every morning, but he now does so for Alejandra. He still sends her flowers because it makes him happy, not because he wants to win her over. Their personal life is more concerned with the here and now than with their previous work. The movie memorabilia life he was accustomed to is quite different from this setting. He is only a spouse and a parent there, not a worldwide celebrity. Richard refers to his marriage's core tenet as being already whole. People claim to be searching for their soulmate or someone to complete them in a lot of love tales. This type of thinking, in Richard's opinion, overstresses a connection. You will ultimately be let down if you expect someone else to solve your issues or give you a sense of fulfillment. When Richard and Alejandra first met, they were both content and secure on their own. They may just enjoy being together because they don't require each other to be complete. This relieves the burden of anticipation. Richard doesn't need Alejandra to be anything other than who she is, and Alejandra doesn't need Richard to be the ideal Hollywood spouse. As a result, a connection based on complete acceptance is created. This leads us to what we may refer to as his journey's last act. Richard's personal life seemed to be a revolving door where women came and departed for decades. They may just enjoy being together because they don't require each other to be complete. This relieves the burden of anticipation. Richard doesn't need Alejandra to be anything other than who she is, and Alejandra doesn't need Richard to be the ideal Hollywood spouse. As a result, a connection based on complete acceptance is created. This leads us to what we may refer to as his journey's last act. Richard's personal life seemed to be a revolving door where women came and departed for decades. The pursuit and performance are no longer the focus of his life. It is about a shared, peaceful cadence that is effortless to keep up. Alejandra was never searching for the movie star. Thus, she never needed to be persuaded to stay. She was searching for the man who was waiting in the quiet. Finding a new role did not lead to Richard Gere's happy ending. By being himself at last, he discovered it. Finding the one frequently begins with discovering oneself, as Richard Gere's experience demonstrates. He spent decades donning many masks beneath the bright lights of Hollywood before realizing that genuine connection occurs in the quiet times. He at last discovered a place where he didn't have to be anything but himself by leaving the performance. Did you like this video? For more icon tales, click the like and subscribe buttons. Tell us in the comments which aspect of Richard's adventure shocked you the most and ring the bell so you never miss an update. I appreciate you watching.